Welcome to that episode of ATB Meets. Today is a very special day for me. It's a very awesome episode we have for you guys. We have how I would describe industry legend, very important person, Schneider, who is the co-founder of IGN, the world's biggest video game media outlet, and a huge, fountain of knowledge in all things video games, and someone who I've invited on the channel today to talk all things Nintendo, past, present, and future. So welcome, Per. How are you?
Oh, thank you. I'm well. You're totally promising way too much.
Nah, not at all.
With that speech. All you're getting is me with my two farting greyhounds today.
Yeah.
So it's not me. If you hear any noises, it's Midna or Cullen.
We'll make sure they're still in the shot, so it's just like they're not cut underneath.
That's right.
People realize. Yeah, I'll say look a bit sus.
It's her.
So as I said, I always wanted to talk Nintendo with you, and recently I think I said to you in one of the messages I sent to you that so I have a 15-year-old son now, and it's funny as I got him into video games, I was a very big Nintendo fanboy, so I always pushed him towards Nintendo, but I've realized now, something that's hit me the last few years is how differently I feel kids see Nintendo to how I almost remember them, because they are different, but it's how I still see them in a way, almost how I still want to see Nintendo, which is a company that's very kind of strong, and I almost imagine them to be how Sony are now, whereas I think when I listened to my son's friends talk about video games in general, and it seems that they just see Nintendo as this completely different, they're almost not, they're never included in the conversation of, when it's like a console war. It's always Sony and Microsoft, and Nintendo's like an afterthought. Mm-hmm. And I was contemplating this, and I was asking my son about it. He's like, yeah, all my friends are just, they're either Sony or Microsoft, and Nintendo. It's not that they don't play Nintendo; they just see them not in that race, right? Which not in that same conversation. And that got me thinking to how they used to be, like when I was my son's age, and how they had their big console with Sega, and they were definitely in the race of power, and specs and bits, whereas now they completely shy away from it, right? They're not in that race at all. And so I was curious, to ask, what was your first interaction with Nintendo, and what was your first memories of your first introduction to Nintendo?
Yeah.
First of all.
I can go over that, but just as a note to when people think that Nintendo is an afterthought, or isn't kind of like at the same level as Microsoft or Sony when we're talking about console gaming, it's pretty funny, because maybe Nintendo likes it like that, but the Switch is the only console in the last couple of years that has sold over 100 million units, right? It's at 100 million. Sure, some people may have multiple Switches. Some people may have more than multiple.
I just get much. I got my OLED here somewhere. Yeah,
I keep buying them to get Joy-Con, and
I was going to ask you, how many Joy-Cons do you have now?
You're
famous for your collection.
We don't talk about that. I have all of them except the Labo ones.
God damn.
No, my first introduction to Nintendo, I'm obviously a bit older than you are. I was born in 1971, so I'm over 50, and I grew up with, my very first video game console was the Fairchild Channel F, which few people remember today. Was the kind of like the first successful console to use cartridges. And then my friend had an Atari VCS. We played that. I had an Atari computer. Everybody had a Commodore 64. Yeah, so that was my era. And then when I went to college, I stopped. I played way too much as a kid in high school. But when I went to college, I stopped. And so that whole NES resurgence, after we had all gotten bored with video games and the industry crashed, and I can tell you it was real. Like we stopped playing video games except for in arcades, right?
Yeah.
I stopped, and then I started again when I lived in Japan. I went to college in Tokyo, and my then girlfriend and best friend bought me a Super Famicom. It had already come out. It was like a year old or something at that time. They bought it for me with a copy of Super Mario World.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, oh, cool. I was playing some PC games, more kind of like sim stuff and strategy stuff. And then I started playing Super Mario World, and I didn't stop. I didn't go to sleep.
Yeah.
I was just from first I was impressed by just like kind of like the purity of the visuals. So obviously I'd seen elevated graphics in arcades and in Japan. A lot was happening with games like Daytona, and actually it was a little before that, but it was Sega was already making polygonal games.
Yeah.
And so I was impressed with that. And then I played Super Mario World, and I was just impressed with the purity, but the purity of game design too. And I was like, I can't believe how good this is. This is so much better than what I played on Atari or Commodore back in the days. And I immediately went that weekend. I went out and I bought a whole bunch of other games, and I bought all of the games that had a Nintendo logo on it.
Yeah.
Made by Nintendo, because I was like, I can't believe how good they've gotten. And I never looked back.
I remember getting a Super NES and playing Mario World. I remember in my school, half the people had bought it with Street Fighter 2 and not the other half with Mario. And I thought it might even still be to this day my favorite Mario game. Super Mario World. I still think it's just an incredible. It's not my favorite platformer on Super Nintendo. I get beats with this, but I to this day am more of a Donkey Kong Country fan. Okay. Donkey Kong Country I could play forever, I think. But I do. It is funny because when I see the Sony and Microsoft kind of playground thing that's going on with fans, it does remind me of the Sega and Nintendo console war, and I think that's like the big console war, right? That's the one of legends, the one where it got really aggressive, where Sega went after Nintendo, but Nintendo also fought back a lot, which is something I just can never imagine them doing anymore. They would use so they would talk about their Mode 7 that they had in the machine, and they would talk about the power of the machine and use it against Sega. And I don't know if that's a reflection of their president at the time, Yamauchi, who was a very, he was a very badass kind of figure, that took no stuff of nobody, and I feel like that's definitely a different side of Nintendo that they don't have now, or, that was much more prominent then, I think.
Yeah, remember, Nintendo was largely unchallenged during the Famicom and NES days, right? They had to convince the world that video games were worth investing in again. They were a small player in the US and in Europe, and then Sega took the gloves off, right? Yeah. Sega was pursuing the market leader, trying to beat the incumbent, and they went full American on Nintendo, right? There's some great documentaries about this that you can watch, but they aggressively advertised similar to Pepsi and the Cola Wars in a way, and took Nintendo to town. And I think Nintendo at first just kind of was playing it clean. Nintendo was used to having such overwhelming third-party support that they, their third-party partners like Capcom, Square, everybody was marketing games for them and making the NES a success, and even add-on devices in Japan like the Famicom Disk System worked really well, right? And then in the 16-bit age, things went nuts. And Sega with inferior hardware. I am an owner of a Mega Drive and all of that.
Yes.
But Sega had weaker hardware. It was janky in many ways. If you remember how you got stereo sound out of the machine through the headphone jack and stuff like that, right? Yeah. The Super Nintendo was elegant and beautifully designed and just really well put together and more powerful hardware.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and then Sega took him to task with marketing and said, we have blast processing, which meant nothing. And and Nintendo was playing defense, and then over time, kind of went on the offense with some stuff too.
Yeah, I went back and looked at some of the Sega marketing. It was just incredible. I'd feel like it would never happen today. But there's an advert of an open road, a TV commercial of an open road, and the camera pans over to a milk truck that's stuttering, barely moving, and it's got a poster of Mario on the back. And then the camera continues moving, and it's got a Ferrari with Sonic's face on the back, and it just zooms past, you know, and it's just
and
it's brutal.
And that was, that was really not that they hadn't been console wars in some fashion before that, but it was the beginning of giving gamers social currency to root for their team, right? Like people started calling it the plumber box, and like they were helping people come up with insults to basically be their street team. we had a little bit of that before with Commodore versus Atari too, right? Like there was definitely rivalry there, like Atari can display more colors, but the Commodore has the SIT sound chip and everything's out there. So as kids we were doing the same thing, but like it really went to a next level with Nintendo versus Sega, and it's so funny to look back now and see Sonic and Mario at the Olympic Games.
That's the funny thing, right? It's like they're just like buddying up now. But
it's so funny.
I never realized how close Sega actually pushed Nintendo. I mean, like in the UK at least, I remember it was fierce. Like I remember, how old must I have been? I don't know, 11 or so, 12. And I remember in the playgrounds, it was constant arguing that, there was the Sega guys and the Nintendo guys. But I was looking at some of the numbers, and it's something like in 1990, Nintendo owned 90% of the video game, game share, market share. And in 93, I think it went down to like 55. Like Sega ate right into it, and I think they even outsold the Super NES in America. I think 2 or 3 years in a row, they outsold it for quite a while. I think it was only when Nintendo had the when Rare came out with Donkey Kong, and they had the Silicon Graphics chip and all that they really surpassed them again. That people couldn't believe that a game like that was running on the Super Nintendo.
And I lived in Japan at the time, so the view was very different there, right? There was nobody, like Sega really couldn't get close to Nintendo in Japan because Nintendo had all the big franchises Japanese players cared about, and Sega was a force in arcades, right?
Yes,
the best arcade games of that age. Namco was up there, Taito was still up there, but Sega was pushing the envelope with technology and all sorts of crazy things with full motion rides and everything, right? But at home, Nintendo was king in Japan, but in the US, Nintendo didn't pay attention to gamers wanting more mature, more violent games, certainly in the US. And sports, right? And sports, EA went nuts on Genesis, and sports games were better on Genesis. And there were more of them. And so, they definitely gave them a run for their money.
And another thing that was different about Nintendo then, it's like I think now they have an image of just very nice guys that work closely with developers, and they're very open. And I think like back then, didn't they forced, well, I think they more or less forced developers to make games exclusively for their system. They couldn't they couldn't go off to make games for Sega. I think that's why Sega went off and got I think that's what gave Sega the idea to then sign up celebrities to try and counter that. But Nintendo were ruthless, I think they didn't. I think they sold the cartridges. I think, didn't they, to the developers as well, and like they were really brutal. Nintendo, really,
they were. No, Nintendo. They're incredibly nice people who work at Nintendo, whether in Japan or at NOA or at Nintendo Europe. There are lots of nice people, but it is not the image. If you remember the Wii ads with "we would like to play," right, with the polite Japanese guys bowing, and like they're very just kind of non-threatening and nice and businessy. That's the exterior. Like Nintendo's got some tough businessmen, some ruthless people, and like there are stories that Miyamoto is outwardly a very nice and pleasant person, but that he is a very tough person to work for and to please. And I'm sure there are lots more like that on Team NCL. No, they've remember Nintendo America was run by lawyers at one point.
Right? Howard Lincoln, wasn't he? Was
and Nintendo was a very litigious company, especially in the US. Nintendo was a very tough company when it came to third parties. What you say about the format of choice? Yes, you had to place an order for the cartridges that had to be manufactured by Nintendo. And if you didn't sell them, you were sitting on that inventory. You couldn't.
Yes, exactly. That's what I thought. Yeah, because they would have to almost estimate how many games they thought they would sell, right?
Yep.
The developer, I mean. And like you
And
say,
then-
if they hadn't sold them, then what do you do?
Yeah, and then as we were heading out of the 16-bit generation, and Nintendo's tried lots of ways to kind of own software distribution and cut out stores too, right? Like in Japan,
Yes.
there were download services that were at, Japan's equivalent of 7-Elevens, like mini marts and all that. And when we're heading into 32-bit/64-bit, Nintendo partnered with Sony basically to the dog just went upside down. He's still alive. Don't worry. No, they partner with Sony for Sony to make a CD a CD drive for the next console, and then there was, it obviously was first supposed to be an add-on, and Nintendo basically stood him up at the altar, right? Like the famous CES press conference where Nintendo announced they had instead partnered with consumer electronics rival Philips, the Dutch company, and left a Japanese company surprised and picking up the scraps. And then, Sony basically vowed eternal revenge and came back to the PlayStation, right? Like there's some ugly stuff, and that is not something that you see from a lot of Japanese companies where partnership and loyalty is usually valued so highly that you couldn't imagine a company partnering with a foreign company instead of a domestic one. Yeah, it's crazy stuff. Nintendo is ruthless.
Yeah, they really were. Yeah, they really were. And so it is funny because it's like you say. So when the PlayStation arrived, and it almost they became the big player, and I was looking back over it and I forgot Nintendo would never do this now. The fact that Sony came out with a 32-bit machine. Sega came out with a Sega Saturn, which is also a 32-bit machine, and Nintendo almost bypassed it and went straight to 64 bits, right? Which is like almost stamping over everyone, And I could never imagine them ever doing that now. But they were all up. I remember the commercials as well. This is the machine more powerful than the machine that put the man on the moon and stuff like that. And they were all in on look how powerful we are. Look how our specs.
They were like during that era, and obviously there were concessions, right? The N64 did not have a disk drive, so they didn't have to pay licensing for CD-ROM or later DVD technology. Nintendo always bucked that, and you didn't have any moving parts inside the N64. But they invested in certain graphics technologies, right? Like obviously a much smoother look and anti-aliasing, and like really kind of trying to show up PlayStation as being, games looking pixelated, looking smoother. But like when it gets down to it, the PlayStation had advantages and was able to do things the N64 couldn't do. Certainly when it came to audio and storage space, the N64 didn't have a sound chip, because who made the best sound chips of the era?
Exactly. Yeah.
Sony. Who did Nintendo piss off? Sony, right? So the N64 had to basically, it was very costly to run a game and have multi-channel audio because you didn't have a sound chip helping you. So lots of difference between the hardware, but the N64 was advanced and it was awesome, and it had analog control, and it had they had expansion in mind. There were all sorts of slots, obviously, for upgrading RAM and all that. It was a cool piece of hardware, and Nintendo at that time was still all in. They worked with Silicon Graphics. They were really pushing that realism angle. And then the last time they did that was with GameCube.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yes.
GameCube, in a lot of ways, there was some great tech in that box. It had, it could do 480p, 3.2 pull down stuff. Like games looked sharp and awesome. And if Nintendo had followed through on some of the things that it was planning, you could have a broadband and a modem, that you could plug into the back. It obviously had the Game Boy, a player that you could sit it on. Like there was a lot of cool tech and connectivity, but I think that was the generation where they noted, they basically said, we cannot win this arms race.
Yeah,
we want to make money with our console hardware, and Sony said, we don't care if we make money with our console hardware. We just want people to have the box, and we make money off the software.
That's right. Because I think licensing is that. Yes, I think the only Nintendo console that they released where they didn't make a profit, where they lost money on it, was the Wii U. I think every other Nintendo console, I think, didn't they sold at a profit. I'm not sure. Maybe
it's tough to say. Like that is the common story that Wii U was expensive because it obviously had to have a screen packed in and all of that.
Yeah.
They certainly didn't make a profit later when they had to discount it because the Wii U obviously wasn't selling, right? So originally, you know, the Wii U was said to be an add-on. It was, you know, a screen add-on for the Wii. And then with a lot of consumers complaining about not having HD graphics, obviously at the time they decided to go for a full replacement. But yeah, interesting time. Definitely now, you know, Nintendo still makes, you know, high-tech devices in a way, but they want to make money, and so you're paying a lot for a Switch, right?
Yes.
A Switch OLED over here is $350.
Yeah.
That's not a cheap device.
No, and it's crazy to me, it hasn't come down in price really either. Like, you know, even the original model is still holding its value. It's almost 6 years.
111 million units sold in, and you know, as long as Nintendo still, like, the PlayStation 5 now is outperforming it in the US when you look at NPD on money made on hardware sales, but the Switch is still the leader in unit sales, and until that changes, Nintendo is like, well, let's wait, right?
Well, yes, in fact, I was going to ask you later, but I'll ask you now, because one of the, I think it's going to be more and more in future debates, is whether the Switch will end up outselling the PS2, which I think is at 155 million. And I can't remember what the Switch is at now. I think it was
111.
111. Yeah. So do you think it? Because I think they are going to, you know, elongate this lifespan of the Switch. I feel like they are going to push it forward. Maybe with a Switch Pro. People hate that one, but maybe. But I think it's got a chance.
I mean, I will happily go on record to say that I believe it will absolutely outsell it, because the Switch, you know, unless something drastic changes and then Nintendo goes, we're bored with this, we're going back to a different type of set-top box or handheld, it's not going to happen, right? Like, the Switch is now a bona fide success, and Nintendo is going to continue the Switch line of devices the way they continued the DS one.
Yes.
Which most likely means that we will get a replacement unit for the Switch that is, you know, people talk about the Switch Pro, that maybe outputs higher definition graphics, has more hardware power, it scales up like the model that Microsoft is running with the Xbox Series S and X, right? Like, we are expecting that the next Switch will still be a Switch, and it will be counted as a Switch when it comes to sales numbers, the way the DSi and follow-up devices were counted for DS. Not like the 3DS, which then means, you know, most the games will be backward compatible to the current Switch, which has a huge install base, so that makes sense. But if you have a more expensive Switch, you'll be able to play those games with better graphics. And maybe battery life will be longer. Well, that's always tough to have higher fidelity and more longer battery life, which means, will they sell another 40 million units on a upgraded Switch? Of course they will.
Yeah, I mean, they have so many games. They still have more Pokemon games to come out. But, you know, another Breath of the Wild, another Zelda game, you know, Bayonetta 3. They seem like they have a lot of software still to come. But whatever the Mario team's working on, you know, I do feel like they can make this last for a while. But in terms of, so I'll ask you now, in terms of the future, because I feel like Nintendo can't help but it's still alive. It's still alive. It's still alive. I can't help but think that Nintendo feels the need to always innovate in a big way. But I feel like this is the one time where I feel like most Switch players are happy with with this kind of model. I think, you know, they would be happy with a next gen Nintendo machine being a Switch again. You know, like a portable you can take with you and play at home. But I just don't imagine Nintendo saying, okay, here's a more powerful Switch in 2-3 years time.
The Switch hasn't outstayed its welcome the way that the Wii did, right? The Wii was such a big departure that eventually we said, okay, we're done with motion games. Even casual players were, except the ones still buying, Ubisoft's dancing games. But most people were ready to move on from the Switch, and so from the Wii, and there were certain applications for motion controls that people still like, but their experience wasn't centered around it, right?
Yeah.
And so the Wii U didn't actually offer a departure that was, or something that was attractive to most people. It was very fussy, and it looked like a toy compared to the competition. It didn't have the games from third parties to push it. Switch is a completely different story. Like in Japan, the console war is over. This generation, it's over. Nintendo has the biggest role-playing franchises. The ones that used to be exclusively on Sony platforms like Monster Hunter, Persona. Everything is on Switch now, right? Yeah. The one thing Sony still has is the sort of kind of like mainstream Final Fantasy games, right? Which will land on PlayStation in Japan and will eventually be cloud playable on the Switch.
Yeah.
But yeah, the console war is over there. It is an RPG machine. It is a Nintendo game machine. In the West, it's a little trickier, right? We have now the Steam Deck, which costs twice as much, which gives you access to all of the cool indie games you're liking on the Switch, but also games that you can't play natively, like Control and, major third-party games that do need a little bit more graphical prowess. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting. I think there'll be a upgraded Switch model that significantly improves visuals when docked. I don't know how much it's going to do for resolution on this tiny screen. Games look pretty good. They look fine
for me. Yeah, I'm happy.
But certain games run choppy, right, and could use that extra processing power.
Yeah. Do you think we'll ever get? I mean, the Switch has come forward in this regard, to sort of third parties. But do you think Nintendo will ever get back to a day where they have pure parity? So we have the biggest Assassin's Creed game, the Call of Duty games, that type of level, AAA.
No, I don't think so. Like not for now. As long as there's certain game types that Nintendo does better than everybody else, right? And like Animal Crossing really kind of stoked the indie market into going nuts with farming and cozy games and like these kind of life simulations, right? Like Animal Crossing really, really inspired an entire genre to develop on PC, right? And it's thriving on PC. And so for most people, that's still an at-home experience. They're not going to buy a Steam Deck. And even with the PlayStation and Xbox, you're not going to take those games on the go. And so as long as Nintendo has that niche, I don't think they'll ever, become a nuclear power again and enter that sort of standoff. They don't need to. And then with Nintendo, you can never predict the future. I once did.
Yeah.
I once predicted the 3DS, and it's because I was at CES and I'd seen 3D screen technology, and I said, if Nintendo sees this thing, they're going to make a handheld with 3D graphics. And it was a total shot in the dark. It was mostly because I was excited about the screen technology. And then they brought out the Nintendo 3DS. And for a while, that was hot stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like, just like James Cameron sparked like people wanting to see movies in 3D.
Yeah.
And that age ended.
Yeah.
And Nintendo was wise to pull back. They were not wise to pull back with the Wii U on the Wii brand.
It's funny because motion controls. Yeah, it's well fun because I was listening to a couple of days ago. I was listening to the last episode of MVC, and you were reminiscing about the Wii. And I haven't played the Wii for a long time, but there's a couple of things that got me that hit home with me, and one of them was that I remember you were talking about the first time you saw the graphics for the Wii, and it was like like a bucket of cold water. It was like, God, this is basically GameCube, and I remember feeling the same way, thinking, God, why don't Nintendo just, push a bit more, and it's funny. I'm always in two minds with Nintendo. It's like, I want them to, push a little bit more power, specs wise. Like, I want them to try and match Sony and Microsoft, but at the same time, I do love when they go crazy. And I was won over by the motion controls. I do think they went a bit crazy in some games. Even Nintendo games, I think there's parts in Super Mario Galaxy where you're balancing on, and you don't need the motion controls for certain parts. But that was incredible. I mean, and it did. I did think that they even made what you'd suppose regular AAA games like Resident Evil 4 more fun to play. I thought it was more satisfying to get headshots with the cursor, and Metroid Prime was incredible. And
honestly, I think that's, you were talking about like, will they ever do something else again? I think they will do something else. I was going to say, don't count Nintendo out when it comes to crazy inventions. And one of the largely unexplored kind of areas of where things can get better in PC and console gaming is, the human computer interface, HCI, the way we interact the games and what it feels like. Obviously, when you put on a VR headset, suddenly you're no longer using a camera stick. You can just look at the thing that you want to look at, right? And it's a game changer. It might make you go, but it's a game changer to be immersed in a world. And Rumble was a big deal when it first happened, with N64 and the Rumble Pack.
Yes. Yeah.
I think Sony did a wonderful world with what am I, Aladdin? Sony did a wonderful job with a PS5 controller and the way that they improved the feel of, like what it feels like to shoot a gun with this kind of approximation of a gun, the controller, what the feedback feels like. And Nintendo did it with, in 1-2 Switch, when you're trying to feel how many balls are rolling around. Like that stuff is brilliant.
Yes.
It's gimmicky. And like, it's almost frustrating that there's usually 1 or 2 killer apps that demonstrate it and then never again, right? Like Astro on the PlayStation 5, which is the closest thing to a Nintendo game on a PlayStation console ever.
Yes.
Does such a good job making you feel like bow and arrow and all that. And Nintendo did such a nice job with HD Rumble with 1-2 Switch. And, And now it's much more rote and commonplace, but there will be something new. Because if you think about it, what sticks do to make you feel like you're in control of a character, or what the triggers do to simulate a gas pedal or a gun or something, or a gun trigger, we're still in the infancy of how much better all that sort of stuff can be. And like, if there's one company that can figure this stuff out, it's Nintendo.
Yeah, that does get me really excited, because I was having a conversation with a friend recently, and we were talking about the state of just video games in general. And I didn't want to get down on it, because video games are impossibly hard to make. But I was saying to this, I felt weird. I love my Switch. I have a PS5, but this generation is I felt the least amount of excitement, because I don't know. I'm struggling to find new experiences, and I think, and I also, but how it's, to make original games these days is so difficult, because there's so many games being made that how do you make an original game mechanic now? It's so difficult, and I was thinking, is VR going to be the next, the way where we get new experiences, new I was thinking about the PS3 era, and I remember that was the era where all these new franchises came out, new ways to play, the Assassin's Creed games, and, the Uncharted, and, Last of Us, and, the Batman games. There's just a massive amount of just new games and new ways to play them. And I think those have been they're still being made, but slightly better, but it seems like the jumps aren't as big, in terms of, a lot of it's coming from indies. I feel like, that's where I find myself going to now. There's a lot of indie games I go to, but how do you see this generation so far? I mean, I include the Switch, but also the PS5 and Xbox One is.
I mean, like you're putting into words something that definitely we're all feeling about this generation, in that, on the Sony and the Microsoft side, it's about hardware power and making things more beautiful, and the underlying current is the open worldification of video games, right?
Yes.
Breath of the Wild has done this, and I will say that Breath of the Wild to me felt wholly unique as a Zelda game when I played. There's some people who say it's too much of a departure from previous Zelda games. Those previous games still exist, and they re-release them, and they make those kinds of games still, I'm sure. But Breath of the Wild felt like you were writing your own story, and it had some elements that, honestly, Ubisoft pioneered, where you're climbing a tower and you unlock a portion of the map, right? Like that Nintendo followed on. Usually they chart a course rather than follow one, but then they created something that was far less guided, where you felt like every adventure you were having in Breath of the Wild was your own.
Yeah,
And when you talk to friends about it, your friend would say, "Oh, one time, I shot a flaming arrow at this thing, and it exploded, and the guy flew behind me, and he was on fire, and he fell into the river." And like everybody's got these stories about flying through 100%. The air and following the dragon, and that to me, that was fresh and new.
Yeah.
But you're right. Like following that game, it set a high bar. A lot of things were derivative, right? Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is like Smash Brothers Ultimate, like a collection of everything you would want in a Mario game. It's like it's the kitchen sink approach to doing everything. Super Mario Odyssey, it's a little Banjo-Kazooie, right? Where you're taking on the form of other of your enemies and all of that. Animal Crossing New Horizons is the best Animal Crossing, but it is the kitchen sink Animal Crossing. And so there were some things that were unique and surprising, like Luigi's Mansion 3, Metroid Dread, where you're kind of going back to something that feels more like classic games. But I will say, I think this is the age of the roguelike and roguelite, which is almost like a return to classic arcade games where, you die and it's over and you start over, right? Yeah. Like it's get good games that can be very satisfying. To me, I'm more of an explorer. I like filling in a map, and I don't like to redo things, that's why I drop off of some games like that. But yeah, we didn't get a Wii Fit or a Guitar Hero Revolution or or like Mario 64, where suddenly we have polygonal graphics, or Daytona, where suddenly we have a racing game that looks like reality. We didn't have that this era. More difficult to innovate, and I don't think the innovation will come from VR. Like the first steps in VR were really, really cool and unique, and I did have some Mario 64 aha moments playing around with toys and tools in virtual reality. But I think the step forward is going to come from AR. Right? That's augmented reality, because VR is not a social experience.
That's the problem. Exactly. Yeah. It's amazing, but you can't sit and watch someone else enjoy it, so.
Yeah. Now the other
just saw it roll over. Yeah.
They do sleep upside down, and people get worried about whether they're still alive.
They synchronized sleep.
That's Midna this time. No, but I think I don't think it's over. Like Ring Fit Adventure was a really cool, unique experience, really cool. But it is very derivative of Wii Fit and what we've done there. But like Nintendo once in a while makes a game where you go like, wait, what? Like, how did you even? Right? They're really good at inventing genres, and they have a lot of competition now, in that they're indies who just through access to tools, they no longer have to code their own graphics engines or physics engines and all that. Like the playing field is a little bit more level for creative thinkers, and somebody will make a game like Braid that's about rewinding time and really messing with you. Yeah. And you're like, holy crap, where did this come from? Or somebody will make a game like Journey, where you're playing through a story that is not told with words, and you're collaborating with another you think it's an NPC, but it's not, right? Like they're these really cool, unique moments that are still happening, but more often now they're coming from indies.
100%. Yeah, I played the last game. I felt like that. There was I don't know what you call it. I guess it's like a rhythm game, but you're on a motorbike. I think it's called Sayonara Hearts. I want to say that's what it's called. Which is someone told me. Yeah, someone for about 2 years was telling me to play this game. I kept putting it off, and I played it a few months ago, and it blew my mind. God, this is what I mean. It just felt really, like you said, it's just fresh, and I felt like I had a new experience. So yeah, I do think I'm hopeful for the future. I do think Nintendo will bring something out that will be different. I don't know if it'll, if it'll be in the next machine. I don't know. I feel like if there is the next generation console will have. I just can't imagine them just releasing a more powerful Switch as well. I feel like it's going to have something different, a different way to play. I think.
I think the other thing to be said about this generation and this age in general is, South Park called it member berries. It's about nostalgia and bringing things back that we loved as kids. Yes. I mean, there's going to be a Willow TV show, right?
I love Willow.
No, I love Willow too. But it's like literally like the top grossing movie of the year is like Top Gun. Gun, like everything is about something that we loved as kids, and then our kids know through memes. Like our kids can quote Scarface.
Yes.
But they've never seen Scarface,
100%,
right?
yeah.
And so there's this familiarity and there's this sort of meme culture around things, and then there's this sort of reverence of the past. And so Nintendo is playing to that. They've innovated with stuff like Splatoon, right? Like they made Japan play third person shooters, but like it's pretty amazing. And I think you'll see innovation in kind of like at that smaller scale, and you'll see a lot of nostalgia plays because that's what sells, right?
Yeah.
That's why you get a Link's Awakening redo and all that.
Yeah.
So
I wish I hope, I don't know if they do, but I hope they do. Talking on original ideas, I really loved ARMS, and I think that's such an underrated game, and I think that's such a cool idea, and I still think they could tweak it. It's not perfect, but I really loved it. I love playing that game, and I completely forget even exists because no one speaks about it anymore. But I think that is such an awesome game, and it's really fun.
I couldn't get into it, but I really appreciate it trying to do something different. I love that it existed, but it wasn't necessarily my favorite game to play. But look, there's cool stuff like that happening. Like sometimes somebody takes an idea that Nintendo maybe pioneered, like with Majora's Mask, although Chrono Trigger did some stuff like that. But Majora's Mask made you revisit the same areas in different time zones, and they changed, and you get a game like Deathloop now, is Deathloop is Majora's Mask as a first-person shooter, right? And like, totally. So other people are carrying that torch and using the innovation in different genres in different ways, and that's cool by me.
Are you surprised? I used to mention this to my brother all the time, and my frustration that Nintendo did not have like the Call of Duties or whatever. And I always comment to my brother that I'm always surprised that they do not have a second party team, for example, that is dedicated to almost making those type of, let's call them mature games, those type of, like a GTA or like a Call of Duty, or something like The Last of Us, even, something more mature aim. Just, like, I don't like when people say the games are aimed at kids. I think the games are for everyone, adults and everyone. But part of me sometimes is quite surprised that they think, okay, we can't get these games no matter how much we try. Why don't we have a team that, like they had Rare on the N64, like a team that can make 5 or 6 games a generation, but that's dedicated to that to try and bring in this type of audience over. You're ever surprised they don't go down that route? They just clearly it's not for them.
I think it's not their company identity, right? It's like Disney. Disney wants to make family entertainment, and some of that family entertainment is a little older, right? Like if you watching, Star Wars Andor right now, like, there's some pretty heavy themes and action in there, and characters die and stuff, and so they are aging some of that family entertainment up, but they're not going that violent. Obviously, they bought some of the Fox Marvel properties back, and we'll see what happens there. But I think that's Nintendo's identity is not Call of Duty, and they've in the past they've tried two paths. They've gotten Silicon Knights to make Eternal Darkness. It didn't work. It didn't sell. Their most mature owned property is probably Metroid at this point, and Metroid will never do as well as Mario or Pokemon or Zelda, right?
Why do you think that is? Like, why? It's like a big mystery. It's like, why doesn't it? Because even Metroid, they did push. I feel like I felt a definite push in terms of marketing for Metroid, and it's just, I don't know what I don't understand why it doesn't, do Zelda numbers, Mario numbers, because it's, it's critically really acclaimed, and
I'll never understand that. Like, Metroid Prime was not just an amazing game; it was gorgeous, right?
Yeah.
And like, but it's an audience mismatch. The people they had successfully marketed the console to before then were not people who would play a game like Metroid. Now, they played Star Wars, right? They played Rogue Leader, that sort of like, kind of mainstream game, but they weren't in for Metroid, and they probably wouldn't have been in for, some other anime-based franchises in the US at least, that would have succeeded in Japan. Yeah, it's a mystery, but I always think, like, look, the companies like EA that are not bringing Battlefield to Nintendo's consoles, could have succeeded with Plants vs. Zombies Garden Warfare, right? Like Garden Warfare is probably the closest thing to Splatoon before Splatoon.
Yeah.
And they didn't, I think they were just asleep. Yeah. They were targeting the wrong machines, and I mean, it did well enough, but like PopCap should have been the studio for EA to figure out Nintendo, and they just didn't care.
Yeah.
And similarly with Activision earned Bobby Kotick freaking like golden bathtub with Skylanders, right? Yeah. Skylanders blew up on Nintendo machines, but Call of Duty just never worked. And so, they follow the money. Why they don't say what happened with Skylanders we can make happen again in some other fashion, I will never understand. But
100%.
Sometimes the creative spark isn't there.
Yeah, 100%. Well, okay. Well, I need to ask you very briefly about the Nintendo Direct. Just what are your initial, what are your overall thoughts on it? What was your favorite announcement, let's say, and what wasn't announced that you wished was?
All right, let me. I have to refresh my memory because it's now so long ago, like 2 weeks or something. I'm bringing up an IGN article.
I'll say for me that I'll say for me that I gave up on it, but they announced Pikmin 4. I think my reactions all over YouTube. I blew my mind when I didn't expect it anymore. I just gave up hope on it. I thought no, and
so it was. I watched Donkey's video on the Nintendo Direct. Very, very funny YouTuber. Yes. And he kind of like spoke from my heart in that they were announcements on the Direct that make me very happy and that were definitely for me, but they always came with a caveat, right? I'm a huge Pikmin fan. I love the Pikmin games.
I love it. Yeah.
You talk about innovation, right? Like Nintendo did an RTS on consoles when everybody said you can't do an RTS.
Yeah, impossible.
Right. StarCraft 64 got it right, by the way. Underrated.
I had that. I had it. Yeah, really awesome game.
Did a really good job with console controls, but you can't argue that it's better to play on the PC. But Pikmin felt at home on a console. It's great. I love that game. When they announced Pikmin 4, I'm like, oh, thank goodness, finally. But they show your logo.
I know.
Right?
I know.
Then we got Fire Emblem Engage. I'm a huge Fire Emblem game. I have played every game in the Fire Emblem series, going back to the Japanese releases, Japan-only releases. I discovered it while I lived in Japan. I love that series. It was so wonderful when it came to the West. I was frustrated that nobody bought it on GameCube. And then it blew up on 3DS and it did so well, right?
Yeah.
I'm so happy about where Fire Emblem is. I think Engage will be really cool. But the trailer was badly edited. I didn't feel anything. No. I felt nothing.
Yeah.
They can't go to that same well of going like, look, it's Marth. We're bringing him back. They can't do that again. And so the trailer was a but I'm very excited about the game. So, and then, Octopath Traveler 2.
Yeah.
Cool. Bayonetta 3. We've seen it before.
I cannot wait for that. Cannot wait.
Bringing back GoldenEye is cool. And then you'll realize that there's
how bad it is.
No, it isn't bad, but it's it's tough to bring back like the feel, what you felt when you first played those games, because that was an amazing game. And so,
but surely they must be adding the dual stick control to GoldenEye. Surely they must be. I'd hope so. Because I played it about 6 months ago and it was tough. It was very I could not aim at anything in that game 6 months ago. It was really, really tough for me to play.
They'll definitely tweak it, right? Like they added online play, and that's part of Nintendo's platform for N64 games, that it's easy to add online play, but whether you have full screen or not is another question, right? It's like broadcasting a 4-player split screen signal. We'll see how that turns out, but they have made improvements, right? Like we got the Mario collection and it didn't have the simplest things like inverting your view that people complained about. So they are making tweaks after the fact of this stuff. So I'm hopeful that they pay attention. But like to me, the big stuff was definitely knowing Pikmin 4 actually still exists and it wasn't just a mistranslation of Mr. Miyamoto back then.
Yeah,
probably was. It was cool to see Tunic coming to Switch, which like I don't know if the Switch version is very good. Like the trailer looked a little choppy, but I played that on Xbox. that is such a wonderful game with a meta story built into the manual, where it's very innovative. The manual becomes part of the game in a way that you as a kid made the map in the game box like your own, and it became a part of your story, or you discovered a hint in the manual that you were able to use in the game. Tunic's awesome. It's really, really wonderful to see that to come to Switch. It Takes Two is awesome, and it's really wonderful.
Oh, I can't wait for that. Yeah, I still haven't played it. I've always wanted to, and I thought surely that's going to come to the Switch.
Yeah. Sifu is awesome. Front Mission is awesome. Yeah. But a lot of these games come with a caveat that they are better on other platforms, right? And so that's why ultimately I thought it was a good Direct. I thought the announcements were lovely. I love that we're getting a new Fire Emblem game, but it wasn't the top. I didn't walk away and went like, that was awesome.
Yeah.
Even the Zelda reveal, the title reveal, we didn't see enough of the world.
That's what I was going to ask you. Yeah, what did you think of the trailer? Because I was a bit, I don't know if underwhelmed, but I definitely wasn't like I jumped more when I heard GoldenEye and Pikmin 4.
No, that's it, right?
You know,
but you have to also come down to earth and say, you know what, like. Yeah, what they're showing us, they're deliberately not showing a lot of the next game. It's been in development forever.
It's gonna be 6 years by the time it's out. It's insane.
They don't slack off at Nintendo. There's got to be a lot of stuff in there, and just seeing all these floating islands and all of that, and thinking about how it could connect with Nintendo lore. They don't want to tell you any of that stuff, and so maybe they're just very careful with how much they tip the hat, how much they show you, how much new stuff they show you, because they want you to feel it being fresh.
Do you have any predictions for was it Tears of the Kingdom?
I mean, it is very odd that the sword in the logo looks like it's in the style of the Tweely of the Majora's people. Sorry, not Majora's people. Midna's people.
Midna's people, yeah.
Got a damn dog named after that woman.
I'm so jealous. Midna's one of my favorite characters. Yeah,
it is. She even has a snaggletooth too, so amazing. It's like the perfect name for that dog. No, it's. I think it'll connect. I think it'll connect to Majora's Mask. It'll connect to Twilight Princess. And it'll connect to I think it'll connect to Skyward Sword.
I would love that, because I think Twilight Princess is my favorite Zelda game. I think even above Ocarina. I struggle between, but I think in my heart I think Twilight is my favorite. But I've predicted for a long time, and I still have a feeling like I might be right, that I thought that you get to play as Princess Zelda in this. I'm convinced.
But those are the times where Nintendo has very kind of like strict rules around their characters and what the franchises mean and how they would make a new one, right? Like the reason we haven't gotten a new Wave Race or a new F-Zero is because nobody at Nintendo has said the thing about the next F-Zero is X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
The thing about the next Wave Race is this, right? Like Blue Storm said, hey, what if we dial up the weather? And that's how that got made. F-Zero X got made by saying, what if you were racing on pipes? And like they are very strict, and for them the Legend of Zelda may mean you play as Link, and you always play as Link, and they'll never go down that route. But they do like tying things together, and like it's an Aonuma game, and Aonuma, I feel like it would be lovely if we could connect things back to Twilight.
Which is your favorite Zelda game?
Of all time, it would be Breath of the Wild now.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah. I just had such a good time with that game, and like I just couldn't believe, like when you discovered a certain island or a certain labyrinth. Like I'm like, wow, they like. Yes, I was missing the temples or the traditional dungeons, but like they did so much with the world and the sense of discovery, and then like the game systems made you experience things in wholly unique ways. I just thought that was the pinnacle of Zelda, even if it wasn't the best dungeons and the best temples, which Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time are in a furious death match for my other favorite Zelda game. And then I love Wind Waker too, right?
I love Wind Waker.
Wind Waker is all about traversal and how it feels to sail and go from the boat to an island and all of that. That series is just so great.
Yeah.
The only ones that didn't do it for me were the 3DS games. Like I didn't like relinquishing direct control of Link to tap on the screen, even though the puzzles were great and some of that stuff was really clever. Those are my least favorites.
Yeah, I didn't connect with a Skyward Sword. I don't know why. I just couldn't. And I've tried it. I bought it again on the Switch, and it just didn't.
Really?
Yeah.
I liked it better the second time around. It has warts, it has issues, right? And it's kind of like the stiffest, most templated game in that the overworld is just not that interesting, right? And like going back to some like sometimes the collection challenges are just not as fun as they should be. But like I really appreciated Skyward Sword the second time around. Like it has a beautiful story. It has some really cool moments, you know, like it presents you with a bad guy and then turns the bad guy good and all of that. It's a cool game. I dig it.
It's funny. I was thinking when you talk about Breath of the Wild, and there are things in that game where they're better than anything I've ever played in any game. Just like the ideas they had, you know, but just things like, I remember one of the first things that struck me is, you know, there's the part near the beginning where you can't swim, you have no stamina, and so you can't cross the river, but you can chop down a tree and roll the trunk so you can walk across it, you know? Or like there's a part where you can't go up a mountain because it's too cold, but you can have red peppers, you know, and you know, allow you to spend some time in the cold. Or they thought of so many things, you know, that's just
so, and that's why I appreciated that game, because it taught you something different about world progression. I mean, like in that game, you can literally go anywhere if you know what you're doing. You know, save the kind of introduction sequence. Obviously, you need to have the training wheels there, but like once you're in the world, you can do whatever you want. And what had happened with the Zelda franchise is that, yes, you get the introduction of a new power, like, you know, like you can ride on a spinning top, or you can, you know, vacuum clean or whatever, right? Like there are these new things and you will learn something new, but it is very difficult to make you feel the sense of discovery again after you get a hook shot, or you know, especially the hook shot in 3D. Like once you figured that what you could use the hook shot for and how you could traverse the world, or what the bow and arrow could open, or lighting a you know, like fire, like what you could do with fire, those were moments of discovery that it felt like afterwards were always replicated. And I stepped into new games, even Twilight Princess, going like, that's a hookshot target, right? Like that's okay. I can't get across there yet because I need this other thing. Oh, I need the bow and arrow. And I really appreciated that Breath of the Wild didn't do that. And so I would love that sort of sense of discovery again. The thing that blew my mind was exactly what you described. Like I'm walking in the cold and Link is freezing. I'm like, oh crap, he's gonna die because it's too cold. And then you discover that you can get a jacket, or you can eat a red pepper, you can cheese it, you can constantly eat red peppers and do whatever you want, right? Like that, I mean,
it's like they thought of everything. I had so many moments where I thought, I wonder if they thought of this, and I'd complete a puzzle in a really crazy way that would work. And I remember seeing this, I would never forget this video I saw. It was unbelievable. There was someone in a dungeon and they were doing this puzzle where there was like metallic
the electricity.
Yes, right. And he was missing one, I think. And what he did was, that's right, because the boxes were metallic, right? So he was missing one box. He couldn't find it, but he had the idea to put the sword on the last, and it you know, and I said, the current, the electricity went through it. It's like, how did they? The fact that they thought of that is,
I feel like, I feel like 2 million people saw that video and didn't think of that, right? They didn't think that Nintendo would think through the game systems to the point where, you know, metal stuff would conduct electricity, even though they showed it to you in every scene. Like I remember, you know, dropping a sword I didn't want, like a bokoblin grabs it and gets struck by lightning because he now has a metal weapon, and you're like, oh my god,
it's
like, and then you wonder, has anybody else seen that? Or like when you figure out that you can ride a bear, or like, you know, like this sort of stuff, like where you feel like I am the first person in the entire universe who has discovered that you can do this, right? Walking on top of the labyrinth, you know. No, it's a remarkable game. And like the sad thing is now, will the next one be as fresh?
That's what I'm worried about. Because as much as I love Breath of the Wild, I remember saying to my friend, I think it's his favorite game on the Switch, and I said I do love it. I love that game a lot, but there are things to me that I thought I was very excited about the sequel, because I thought, well, to me, there's really obvious things that they could improve. So, like, I love the dungeons, but I thought, well, they could probably improve the dungeons, and I wasn't crazy about the boss fights, and I thought that's something they could definitely improve, and that maybe there wasn't that much of a story, and maybe that's something they could improve. So, and I'm very hopeful that they will. I think they will do incredible. But I am worried about the exploration, the moments of being surprised in that, whether it's going to have that. That's because that's hard.
And like, there are a lot of people who are, childlike in their enjoyment of things that they've seen before, right? Yes. Like, and I got to tell you, when I played Super Mario Sunshine, I was like, is the entire game really beaches? Because I really, really want a real water level, or a snow level, or a desert level, or I really love that variety the old Mario games 100%. Had, and like where you step into a new world literally through a painting in Mario 64, and it's something you hadn't seen before. And I was missing that progression with Super Mario Sunshine.
Yeah.
And like with Breath of the Wild, the beasts are basically the dungeons, and they all have the same style. They all look the same. I was like, man, I want a water temple. I want a forest temple. I want a desert colossus, right? 100%. Like I want to relive that sort of variety, but I wouldn't mind it if they didn't do the exact same thing. And there is no ice temple, but it is a slightly different take on it. Yeah. Breath of the Wild did that through environments. It didn't do that through the temples, but I would like the kind of variety of themes where one thing is the haunted one is the underwater one. Like it's like watching Indiana Jones movies where like when he goes into a temple, like one of them has snakes.
Yes.
And, like that. I understand it, and so I'm hoping they add a little bit of the variety back in.
Yes, definitely. I'll ask you just quickly. I don't want to take too much of your time. I'm very conscious of taking up too much of your time. Just very quickly, are you surprised that we don't have GameCube or Wii games in the virtual console and the online yet? Are you surprised? Because I would have thought like 5 years into the system that we surely would have GameCube games by now.
Well, I mean, they can sell you GameCube games for full price, right? Yeah. Like I think Nintendo basically started with games that didn't sell well, that were running on architecture that was close to Switch, and that's why we got a lot of Wii U ports, right? We got games that were fantastic and they spent a lot of time on that didn't sell, like Pikmin 3 and stuff like that, right? And we got them again on Switch.
Yeah,
they're absolutely gonna go. They will go for the catalog on the GameCube eventually. We get an N64 first. They struggled with emulation. I think it's not straightforward to make GameCube games run on the Switch. It's different architecture. Sony struggles with that too, right? Like with their classic games, certain games cannot run natively, and you need to stream them. And streaming on Switch sucks. It's not very good, and so they probably don't want to go that route. But maybe that's where the next generation of classics will be. It'll be streaming games that you can play a game, which I wouldn't like.
No.
But man, there's an amazing library on the GameCube that they could tap into.
100%.
There's some Donkey Kong Country we haven't seen on this machine yet that could come back too.
Yep, definitely.
There's Fire Emblem on the GameCube that we haven't seen yet.
There's so many. I mean, I was thinking about this. The Beautiful Joe games, and stuff like that. The Killer 7 and all these like games that they had on the GameCube that was so amazing. I forgot I'd kill Eternal Darkness, of course, as well.
F-Zero GX, man.
GX. That's so many games, that they could bring over.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot, but I think we will see some of those games again as reboots and remakes. They can go back to those titles and remake them. It's a lot of work to remake an N64 game and make it look as make it look modern, but it's not that much work, I think, to freshen up GameCube games. So we'll see. I was just looking up what the best of GameCube, and like there's just so much good stuff.
It's like I remember, one of your old colleagues, a long time ago, I was watching a video of Colin Moriarty, and he made a
Yeah.
statement where I think he said that he thought the GameCube was actually a better machine, better system than the PS2, and people went like, "What? What are you talking about?" And I think
Colin said that. That surprises me.
yeah, I think they did a list of like the top 20 games from each system. They had loads of systems, you know, and they were comparing the top 20. And when they were compiling the list, you know, I remember he was saying, "You see, I told you, the GameCube, you know, the GameCube, was so underrated. It was unbelievable. But it had an amazing library of games, you know, amazing library. So it's a shame.
Look, I mean, we are absolutely going to get Metroid Prime on the Switch, right? Like a remake of the original. It's gonna come. Like, it's a no-brainer. Nintendo will bring that back. That game is in the same category as a lot of Wii U games in that it was fantastic, beautiful, and didn't sell that well. Will they bring back Wind Waker again?
Oh, probably. That was the rumor, wasn't it, for the direct, that we were going to see Wind Waker and Twilight Princess?
Yeah, there were some odd rumors, almost like maybe Nintendo's working on them and just goes, well, we're not going to show them now. Because you're pretending like you know what we're doing. Yeah, there's, think of games like Double Dash. It plays very differently, right? Like, is there life for a game like that? Or maybe there'll be a Mario Kart collection. Yeah, there's just a lot. Path of Radiance, Paper Mario, obviously. Lots of good stuff that could come back. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Okay, well, just before you go, then, I've got just a few quick fire questions.
Sure.
Actually, to see, some might be quite controversial. I don't think so. But just play for. So, first of all, I'll ask you: is Banjo-Kazooie or Mario 64?
Oh, that's a mean one. Mario 64 for the memories for me. It just, I can't separate my love for modern video games from Mario 64. I got the machine, hooked it up, and I just ran around in the park outside the castle in the garden. Yeah. And I climbed on the stupid trees and went Yahoo off them, like jumping, sliding. And I showed it to my wife, and she's like, "Yeah, that's nice." And I'm like, "No, this is the future. This is so different. You don't understand. Like, there's just something about how this feels that is different from any other 3D platformer or 3D game." And like, Banjo-Kazooie definitely improved a lot. Like, it's a more beautiful game, the musical fidelity, and honestly, the music is freaking awesome in that game. The whole like adaptation of Teddy Bear's Picnic and all that is great. Some of the area, like the texture blending on the ground, it's like, I replayed it recently on Nintendo Online when it was added, and it's just a really good game. Pound for pound, it's probably a better game than Mario 64, but Mario 64 is more clever. It did it first, and the memories are special.
Yeah, I am more Banjo, but I mean, Mario 64 was it's one of those moments where you think graphics will never get better, you know. And it was thinking it was like playing a Disney cartoon, but you know, that's what it looked like to me. It was just, nothing would ever feel better than this. But I do. Funny enough, I'd have this argument with my brother at the time that I actually think Rare maybe had a better library than Nintendo on the N64. I think Rare was so prolific on the N64 that they were unbelievable. The games, you know, GoldenEye, Donkey Kong, and Jet Force Gemini.
I'm not a big fan of Donkey Kong 64.
I know
Jet
this.
Force, I think Jet Force Gemini is the reason why Metroid Prime went first person, because they couldn't figure out how to do third person shooting with the sort of camera control that Nintendo liked. I don't think Nintendo was very happy with that game. And then Mickey's Speedway even less so afterwards. But no, Rare created the first person shooter on consoles. Like, the reason, it's tough to tell where, what direction games would have gone into, but GoldenEye brought a PC exclusive genre home to consoles, and it, never looked back. It's like, that's why Call of Duty is big now, in Fortnite, all these games. Like, you can trace that back to GoldenEye. And Rare was really, really creative and special in those days. They were also really good at mimicry. They took something very Nintendo-like and then adapted it and made it slightly better, right?
Yeah, I do. I think they were just incredible. I remember the day they got sold to Microsoft, and I've never been so sad in anything in video game history. That was the worst week ever. I felt awful that week. They had a very tough time after that, right? Like, it took them, not that all of their games weren't good on Xbox, but like they definitely struggled. And like, Sea of Thieves is awesome, man. Like, they had that. What a comeback! Now.
that title is amazing.
Yeah.
Like if that wasn't a Nintendo platform,
Yeah.
that would be one of the stars, right?
Yeah. That one's so lows. Yeah. Okay, so GoldenEye or Perfect Dark?
GoldenEye in hindsight. Perfect Dark took everything, made it slightly better. It also got more bloated. And the game, honestly, I mean, did not run well.
It didn't.
In 4-player once you actually customized your matches. I'm a huge James Bond fan. Yeah. I love the James Bond movies. I have all the books. I have all the novels. I love the music. And so GoldenEye just hit that sweet spot for me. And like it was just that universe and how well the game did everything that, again, I can't separate the game from the memories of playing it. Yeah. The sniping and the zooming in, and I love that game, even though arguably Perfect Dark did a lot and had better and more varied multiplayer in the end. It just lacks the style and that sort of it lacks the feels for
I feel like GoldenEye definitely has more people, I think, look back on it more fondly. I feel like it's lasted longer. I think definitely. Okay, favorite Nintendo console?
Super NES.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, for sure. So it's what got me back into gaming, and arguably it's what got me to do this as a career.
Yeah.
And so, I got to be thankful for that too. But the Super NES, the quality of the games. I have a list I made. It's called My Game DNA. Like if you want to just Google it, it's just Per Schneider, or Per, PER, Game DNA, where I list all the games that influenced me. They're not necessarily the best games or my favorite games, but they put me on the track that I'm on, and they informed my gaming taste today. And Link to the Past is it's an unbelievably good game. Mario Kart is an unbelievably good multiplayer game. And there are a lot of role-playing experiences. I really love the way Final Fantasy 4 through 6 felt on the Super NES.
Yeah.
Star Fox, Mystical Ninja,
Fox, God,
the Super Nintendo Goemon games, the one that never came out here, Goemon 2.
Yeah.
It's just, those are such freaking awesome games.
And probably still the last time I think Nintendo had AAA support, no, third party, sorry, really full third party support.
Super Castlevania, Contra, the entire a Demon's Crest, the Breath of Fire, all of those, the role playing games, at Dragon Quest, everything, right? Yeah. The Super NES was truly special and had some of the best Fire Emblem games. So of course I gotta pick that one.
Definitely. And then lastly, your 3 favorite Nintendo Switch games.
3 favorite Nintendo Switch games. Let me think. That would be, so at the top would be Breath of the Wild. I could say something funny like Pocket Card Jockey, because that game is amazing, but it never came to Switch. So
I've never heard of it.
Someday it'll come to Switch and it'll be the best game on the Switch. It's from the makers of Pokemon. No, it'd be Breath of the Wild, Mario Odyssey. And then I would say I really liked Metroid Dread. I think that was just I was so surprised at how good it is, but it is difficult to pick between your favorite children. I'm a big fan of Splatoon. I think there's just something magical about how these games feel. I love Kirby Forgotten Land. I love Fire Emblem, but no, definitely at the very top is Mario Odyssey and Breath of the Wild, and then it's the rest. Luigi's Mansion 3. If you've never played that game, don't sleep on it. It feels like it was made by Nintendo.
It does. And you're right. Not enough people talk about that game anymore. I feel like it came and went, and it's such a high quality game.
It's frustrating. It's and it is a wonderful co-op experience too. So if you for a parent with a kid, it's just a fantastic game from beginning to end, and it's visually amazing. That there's a reason Nintendo bought that studio. They're just, there's something there. There's that spark there. But
I feel that way.
I cheated. I mentioned 90 games.
No, that's right. I was gonna say I feel that way about Mario plus Rabbids. I think that game is beautiful and plays I just feel like you'd think Nintendo made that game. It's
weird, right? Cool. Yeah. No, absolutely. Very, very strange. It's way better than what you think it would be.
Yeah.
But that's the sort of love Nintendo inspired, I think. You know, Nintendo got people into games and game creation, and I feel like this game is the example of somebody loves the Mario series so much, but then applies something completely different to it, right? Like turn-based strategy, and really struck gold there.
Yeah, it's amazing. I cannot wait to play Sparks of Hope. I'm very excited. Right, Pet, I feel bad. I shall let you go, but I just want to say massive thank you for spending time with us. It's a huge honor for me to have you on. Like I said, I've been a follower of IGN since I was 13, 14. I still listen to MVC every week. And so I'm very happy that you came on. Thank you so much again. I look forward to everything in the future. I look forward to, hopefully, I don't know if you guys are going to be covering E3 when it's back. I hope you do, because I think that's going to be incredible. That's going to be incredible.
We love E3. No, for sure.
100%. Would you like to let the people know where they can find you, where they can follow you?
Yeah, you can find me pretty easily. I have a very unique name. There's only one other Per Schneider that I know. Some guy in Germany probably hates all the questions he gets about video games. But yeah, just Per IGN, PEER, usually dash or no dash IGN across all different devices and platforms and stuff. And like, if you like podcasts, check out Nintendo Voice Chat. We have a big Facebook group called the NVC Podcast Forums that you can join. It's good. It's some 10,000 people strong. So
I follow. Yep.
Yeah, I'm interacting in that one too. So yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome. Well, thank you very much again, Per. Catch you soon.
Yeah.
And everyone else,
for having me on.
Perfect. See you later, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Later.